Hello, Cassidy here, and I am live here on YouTube. I started YouTube again, well, sort of dipping my toes back in February, and one of the things that I committed to was doing monthly live streams on this channel, sort of open conversation, just chatting style live streams to allow us to come together and have a conversation for anyone who'd like to. So I have a link to the StreamYard in the comments, whatever side it's on, and in the description below if you'd like to join and have a conversation. I always sort of jump off with a conversation topic and sort of talk through that, but it can go anywhere. So if you have any topic and you'd like to bring it on, please do. The only request I ask is that if you're new and I don't know you, camera on, real name, and so we can have a conversation. Today I want to kind of jump off talking about online participation, because this is something I think I've been struggling with for a while, and it seems like there is a lot of struggle with it online, or on online spaces in general, in different ways. And I don't know exactly where this is going to go. I haven't planned this much, but I'll start by kind of expressing why this is of interest to me, and then sort of ramble on about what I think I'm seeing with some of the online participation and where the struggles are sort of coming in for me and maybe others. The question of online participation has probably been on my mind for several years now. I think especially since the COVID lockdowns, because I think for everybody online participation grew, but mine specifically and more consistently, especially as I found community in Bridges of Meaning server and other places, and having to do a lot of communicating online with family and friends and all of that sort of stuff. And I think for me it was really interesting because I wasn't a very online person before that. I had social media sites. I watched a lot of YouTube and media, but I didn't participate in it. It was sort of something that I would consume from time to time when I had the chance, but I was mostly out and about living my life and enjoying the chaos of what traveling and doing all that I was required to do with my jobs entailed. But kind of as the COVID lockdowns came and some of this online participation started to rise for myself, I kind of felt this sort of torn nature in myself, where there was a part of me that wanted to avoid it because of all the pitfalls that could come with it. But there was this other part of this online participation that was really meaningful and beautiful and really changed my life in a lot of ways. And so I never knew exactly what to do with it, how to balance it, what I was, how to work through it well. And I think those questions have started to pop up even more now, being that I am, at home more in a new country with a new baby. There are all of these questions of how much should I be participating online and fostering this thing that I got so much joy from and grew from, and how much should I set that aside to grow the thing that I have here. And for a while, I sort of leaned more towards the avoidance of the online participation. I would be online and participate, but I really tried to move towards that pattern that was more pre-COVID, where I spent a lot of time being more interested in using it when I could and consuming instead of actively creating, because it took a different energy and it took a different focus than what I would need to do to ground here. And I think that was helpful for a time and a place, but it became hard because grounding here is much more difficult than it's ever been in any of the other places that I've lived, because of the language barrier, the culture barrier, and all these things that kind of make it more difficult as an English speaker to really feel myself. And it's not only just the culture, but a lot of the things in my life that had changed that I was wrestling with and trying to figure out how to ground and rework in my life. And so, there was this tension where when I was using online platforms or YouTube or whatever it was to consume, it really became an overconsumption pattern where to kind of curb and create some sort of connection to normalcy, I was over consuming in ways that I didn't like. It wasn't balanced. And so I slowly tried to bring in the more active online participation more so that I could find a better way to balance it, because I do think that the way that I can participate here with interacting with people is much healthier than just consuming uh, almost recklessly. But it comes with its own challenges where you start to wonder how much of my decision to come and participate here and let myself grow connections here is stopping me from actually being able to do that in the place that I live. And where is it stopping me from getting like further development in the places that I want to grow by sort of placating it, by taking a half step online. And I know for myself, I struggle with this, but I think I've seen enough to know that there is a lot of this happening for other people too. I think this is where you're starting to get a lot of these different YouTube communities where they're trying to help create supports for people in different areas of life, whether it's business or motherhood. I mean, even here, this little corner, what are we doing? We're trying to find place to have these conversations that are really meaningful to us that we can't find in the places where we're grounded in real life. And maybe can't is a little strong a word. Maybe it's just harder. And there's so much joy coming from that ability to have that support in an online space. Yet there's always that trade-off of how much of the online space and the online participation that we're sort of moving to our energy to, instead of finding ways to cultivate it in our actual lives, is placating something that could be a lot deeper and maybe more difficult, but a lot more helpful and grounded than if we keep running to the internet. But I don't, to me, there doesn't seem like that's a clear answer. That's a yes, because as much as we could say, oh, everything would be healthier if it didn't, if these communities didn't exist online and we were just forced to have them in person. I don't know if I believe that. And I don't think there is a way that we can really remove the internet part of what we're doing and how we're communicating with all of these things, because it's so ingrained in all these different parts of our society now. To just completely wash it away, I think it's pretty impossible. But it also denies the good that can come from it. So you're kind of having to wrestle with the question of balance. What does it look like to have a balanced participation with the ways that we create and put ourselves out online? And where is it creating these trade-offs for ourselves in good and bad ways? I don't have a lot of answers. I definitely see a lot of pitfalls, and I think that probably is just my contrarian nature sometimes. I tend to see the things that could go wrong instead of focusing and cultivating on the things that could be really good. And I can go into that, but I just want to remind anybody who's watching, I have this is an open conversation live stream. So if you would like to join and come in, join the conversation to continue the conversation I'm having with myself, or change the subject, you're totally free to do so. The link is in the side and below. And thank you, Eric, for your solidarity of the difficulty. Yeah, I think for me, I felt the difficulty now more than I ever have because of being so outside of my element. I really enjoy where I live, and so much of my life is beautiful, and I wouldn't change anything of it. And it's hard to even say it's difficult because I've definitely lived years of my life that are much, much harder than what I'm living through now. But there's this different sort of difficulty where it's like a slow, dull, um, exhaustion versus like hard bursts of energy. And so, it's been really helpful to have a bit of the online space to ground myself, get used to, or kind of just remind myself of what I was and who I was and what I'm changing into. But I always wonder how much of that is stopping me from fully embracing what it would look like to get involved and ground. Um, and yeah, it's interesting with YouTube. I started creating again because I didn't want to keep consuming the way I was. And I think whenever I've been in patterns of creation, I'm much less of a consumer. But there's always that, for me, there's always that difficulty of how do I create? What do I create? And where do I put those energies? And I think one of the reasons why I decided to do some of these live streams, that's one, it's easy to create this way versus other ways because you come, you sit, and you let things flow the way that they're going to flow. You don't have to do a lot of tweaking and controlling. But I also liked the ability to allow whoever watched me become more community community participation versus sort of setting out content that other people are going to consume. I don't like doing things alone. It's not my favorite thing. I actually enjoy working with people and working through things with people. And so to invite the people who have watched me put all of this thing out there to work through those things was really interesting to me. But I know that there's always that tension of like where we create and how we create and where is it changing the way that we see and look at others. Sorry, I'm just going to read the comments real quick. I can't talk and read. I'm so sorry. Smat wrote this comment. I've been wavering on starting a YouTube channel because I don't feel well read enough, but IDK if I'll ever feel that way. So at some point, I know I should just start. Yeah, that's really interesting. I've had that struggle because I started this channel sort of when I was in the middle of like a religious transition. And so for me, there was always there was something interesting about starting it then because I could kind of work through ideas. But once I got settled, it became really difficult to figure out how to keep creating because I didn't want to come and look like an authority on something when I felt very new in what I was in. And so there's one part where yeah, you're always going to have to just start at some point because you'll never feel prepared enough. But then there's this other part where sometimes it's good to recognize that fear, that uncertainty, so you don't fall into this trap of becoming something. How do you say it? Like some sort of figurehead that you don't want to be. Like that's always terrifying to me. And maybe you don't have that fear, but for me, there's always that place of how do you create space for exploration and working together with others. I don't ever want to be that person that has to feel like they have to have all the answers and be well read enough and understand enough to teach the world what it's going to be. But I think we're lucky the way that YouTube is morphing and changing and the way it's always grown. There's always that space to kind of give space for that uncertainty and that changing and that morphing and growing with people. Okay, Lynn. I think about how isolation creates mental illness or lacking seeing reality clearly. Deep convo. Blessings. Yeah, I totally agree. I think when you get too isolated, you just lose sight of what is real. But in the same way, too much attention to the online world and trying to be involved in that to stop the isolation makes things really weird too. But yeah, there's probably something helpful in that conversation aspect when you bring that into the online to help sort of fight that isolation feeling. But yeah, I always wonder too, if we fought through that sort of isolation feeling and did the effort to keep moving towards creating in-person connection, despite sort of the insecurities that come with that, would that be a better way of fighting that mental illness tendency that can come from isolation than finding the connection online? I don't really know. And it probably depends on the person. But yeah, I think the isolation is probably what's driving not only the online participation, but a lot of, the sort of mental anguish that's so many people are struggling with. There's all this breakdown of community, and we don't quite know how to revive it or reorient it in the way that culture is changing. It's a tricky one. Okay, Eric has another comment. I moved countries multiple times at critical development stages. Each move was like a death in the world before internet. Bit stretched me beyond ideal functionality with the WWWH. I could see that. I mean, I'd be interested, Eric, in hearing your perspective on, where you think those things differ, and if you thought that, having that before, before the internet was more helpful. I don't know if you've moved after the internet, but I've only moved places and relocated my life and sort of died to the old thing that I was with the internet intact. And in many ways, I think it made it easier, but there was these other factors that made it a lot harder, where I didn't have to feel so stretched beyond my capacities. But you almost need that to really get to that place where you can feel more normal quicker, or at least that's what I'm assuming. And Eric, also, if you've ever, did you ever move to a country where you didn't know the language, or was it only kind of countries where they still spoke a lot of English? Because most of the moves that I've done are to new English-speaking places, but I think it's much more difficult when you have the different language. And I'm sort of in a weird space where a lot of Dutch people, they speak pretty good English. So even though, there's a language barrier, you can generally communicate. It's just this weird sort of tension of not knowing exactly what you're understanding and where things are getting communicated well. Oh, right. You said American, Australian, and Southeast Asian. So I'm guessing Southeast Asian, there was not a lot of English. That I think would be really difficult. I think that would be so disorienting because it's such a different culture. But interesting. All right. Anthony has a message. The tension of Ecclesiastes of making of many books, there is no end. The danger of James, the tongue is a dangerous thing. Yeah. Re-isolation. I lived in Asia for 2 years. Often being online was a way to cope with the difficulties of being in a different culture. Yeah. I mean, it definitely becomes sort of a cope where it kind of soothes you because you can find ways to revisit almost old use, like the things that you watched previously or the ways that you remember life being, and watching media that potentially is from your country or what have you. There's this way of kind of looking back and revisiting what you were. And I think Erica's right, sort of about the death. When you move to a new country and you put yourself into that, you're dying to yourself in a way that is very different than anything I've experienced. And so, yeah, there is something sort of interesting. It's like um, reviving old yous to help cope with the thing you're becoming. It's sort of interesting. Um, uh, that's what Malaysia and Singapore are like. Triculture to quad culture. I don't know exactly what that means, Eric, but um, yeah. No, we should have a conversation sometime about that because I think that would be interesting to explore that. Um, but I mean, there's a lot of things that I think outside of just changing your actual culture um, that are creating tensions with how we live life and how we find community. I think this is sort of showcased a lot in sort of the trad wife or the mommy vlogger sort of phenomenon of women going online trying to showcase how they live life and be helpful to other mothers. Like there's something so fascinating to me about that because it's almost like they can't find those things in other places. They go online because they don't know where to go in their lived experience. And then there's all of these pitfalls that come with that, whether it's like oversharing your life or monetizing your children. There's all of this weird dynamics, but it all comes from this place where people are trying to find connection and make sense of how they're living their lives. And sometimes I think it's even trying to find a way to promote the life that they live and get some support from that. And it's very human. But is it healthy? I don't know. Um, there's all of these weird dynamics with that. And I think that's been particularly interesting with myself being a new mom, trying to figure out, okay, this is the old life that I had. And this is what I have now. And it's beautiful and it's great. But how do I move forward in that? How do I find ways to live well in that? And what is it that I should die to in what came before and what came now? Um, and I think I'm getting some answers. and thankfully I have good community here, or at least I have something to hold on to. But it's interesting to watch that path and sort of broader culture and the way that a lot of women are responding to that difficulty and that tension. And it is a lot of times going online, even if it's not on YouTube to share their lives. Like how many people are going to, uh, apps or online Google searches to figure out how do I take care of my baby? What's the right step to do these things? There's this connections that has been lost. And yeah, I feel the tension in this way that I'm not sure what to do with. The easy thing is to go online and to try and figure those things out in that way, but it just heightens isolation in many ways because you're not able to take all of that life and put it in to practical ways where you're learning. You're doing it on your own in your private searches. And yeah, the communities that end up forming often end up being these online places. And that's just very tricky to navigate. Anthony put a comment, the role of grandparents replaced by internet, especially true with parenting. Yeah. Well, and I don't know enough about the history of family development and where the way nuclear family has taken over, especially in Western cultures, and how that has changed. But I do think there has been a lot of things that we kind of accept as normal that have not been normal for most of history. And so how do you find ways to manage those things? I don't know. There's a lot of people who kind of well, there's the two extremes, right? There's the sort of women empowerment that you can have at home model where you can work and you can have kids and everything's great. And then there's sort of the trad wife model. But neither of them, neither of them seem fully helpful when you're navigating sort of that middle road in trying to figure out how to deal with the modern world and recognize the downfalls that have come from the way that things have developed. But still keep trying to move forward and understand that technology has changed the way that we have the ability to work and create communities. You can't undo that box. So yeah, there's that tension that I'm feeling with those two things. And the online participation on either of those fronts are not very helpful. On the one hand, with the feminist side, there's this whole level of womanhood and motherhood that is being ignored in the dependence of that little baby on you. Now, technology certainly helps that, where you have formula and all of these different things that can help sort of alleviate all of the pressures on the mother, but there are all of these things that really make it difficult to have it all, if you will. Yet there's this other side, especially the online trad wife community participation, that is sort of minimizing sort of this need for women to, this desire for women to do more than just tend home. And, you know, this is what I've sort of found interesting lately. You have a lot of these online trad wife influencers who are sort of saying, just stay at home, you know, make the sourdough, cook for your husband. And there's something sort of interesting about that and appealing, I think, to a point. But there's that recognition that, well, these women themselves are not completely following that path, because by putting their lives online and doing these videos, they're moving into creating some sort of business for themselves anyways. It's not completely like they stay at home and live the trad wife. They're still doing some sort of work. They're putting something out into the world. They're trying to build community. And it seems to me that's what traditional life was always about from the beginning. It wasn't sitting at home eating bonbons, waiting to put steak on the table for your husband. There was a mutual participation where each person in the relationship tended to what needed to be done in the best way that allocated the strengths and resources that they had. And especially when a woman doesn't have a breast pump or formula or ways to take care of their baby, that can outsource to the man. It makes sense why you would find ways to stay at home that keeps the baby safe and close, that you can pick up and put down and kind of have that participation to make sure that you're protecting the family. Anyways, that's a whole different tangent, but there's something too about to go back to the part about the grandparents. There has been sort of that breakdown too, where you're not having these traditional family roles and participation as much anymore, because technology has changed things so drastically that you don't have the necessity of grandparents and like the whole family unit staying together in the way that it used to. There becomes an isolation as well. And so, yeah, there's that really easy out to kind of move towards the internet online participation. Yeah. Well, anyways, I have babbled on quite a lot. If there's any questions or another topic that anybody would like me to talk about, put it in the comments, and also feel free to join if you can. And if you can't join today, I've been trying to do these the first Monday of every month. I eventually want to try to do more, but at this point, I can't commit to anything more than what I have now. There's a lot of things coming up that make it sort of impossible to commit to more at this point. But always open for questions or conversations. But yeah, there's something interesting about being here in the Netherlands, especially because this is the first time in probably 5 years that I've stayed in one place for more than a year, just living, no traveling, nothing else. And it's been really great and really helpful, but a lot of a struggle. And I'm actually returning to the US here soon. And I'm interested to see what it'll look like to go back and compare what I knew based on who I am now from the way that things have changed. And it'll be interesting to feel like I don't have to escape into online places and online community to get a sense of the normal that is sort of ingrained in me from childhood and living in America and having to have, not having to have, but just the sort of what happens when you grow up in a place. You can't help but be influenced by the things that you see around you and the way that it shapes you. And there's always going to be part of you that never leaves, no matter how much you're transforming with the new place that you're in. It's it's interesting to think about what the reaction will be, because I don't know if I will find it comforting or find it sort of odd. I've lived in several other countries before. I've lived in one other country before here, but I've moved around and lived in different states, which not different countries, but sometimes it feels like such a different culture that it can seem to have like a tension. And there's always this weird perception of when you go back, it's this bittersweet moment where you love being home, you love seeing the thing that you knew, and there is an ease with the way that you can participate it. But when you move back, there's also this sort of weird assumption that you're the same person who left. But you're not. You're so different. And there's that level of where do you go back to the person you were for the comfortability of the community that you're participating in? And where do you live and own the places that are changing and very different? And how do you manage the questions of how are things going? What is changing? And that's a difficult one for me right now, because everything is great. Everything's beautiful. Everything's good. Yet there's this difficulty in slowing down, grounding, letting go of a lot of the past of who I was to find something new. It feels like a lie to just go, oh, it's great. Because it's definitely hard. Anthony's got another comment. Reverse culture shock will happen. Culture shock follows an ups and down shape. It's first a high, exciting, but then you'll start getting annoyed at the culture. Yeah, that's probably true. I remember when I lived in Australia, the culture shock was sort of sneaky. For the first 6 months, I really didn't notice much. And I wouldn't say there was a high, but you're learning things, you're having an interest in it, and all of a sudden you realize how different everything is. And that one was even sneakier than, say, here, because they spoke the same language. There was a lot of things that were very similar to American culture. But it took a little while to really feel those differences, and it kind of hit me like a truck in a lot of ways. I'm not sure if the culture shock has fully sunk in with the Netherlands yet. There are certainly things that I notice that are different. I don't get annoyed with the culture itself. I think I get annoyed more with myself in how I participate with it, especially the language. I want to be better at speaking the language so that I can join community and that I can feel more involved in it. But there's just a bit of shortcomings in things that I can't change. There's not much I can do um, to change how fast I can learn, even when I'm studying pretty frequently. Although I've studied less now that I've had the baby, but there's always a little bit of that learning curve that you can't control, and it does make it harder to feel embodied and totally grounded in community. And a lot of that comes with this long period of time where you just feel so stupid in everything you do because you don't know how to fully embrace the culture. You don't know what the right um, movements are, if you will, like the right um, cultural patterns. And then just the language. You don't know how to really form a complete sentence and express what you're really saying. And I think that foreignness has been the thing that made it the easiest to kind of retreat to online or digital places to cope. And I think I'm slowly moving out of it, but it has those ups and downs too. And yeah, it's different to moving somewhere where you kind of think you'll be there for the long haul. Whenever I moved to different places, I always sort of knew it was probably a year or two and that would be it. Or, there might have been hope for something else, but it ended up just being shorter times. Where here, there's not really an end to the new culture that I'm trying to be a part of. It's not like in 6 months we're going somewhere else. No, it's here indefinitely, and whether it's forever or not, you don't know. Yeah, there's some tension in that that's so weird because, for one, there's a little bit less of a fear of missing out mentality. Like if you're traveling abroad and going to live somewhere for a year and a half or 2 years, you kind of have that shorter time frame where you really feel like you have to make the most of the time you're there. Yet here, it's sort of like, well, it'll come when it'll come. And so there's less of that motivating factor to put yourself in and force yourself to do things that you don't feel comfortable with. Yet there's another part of you that realizes how important it is to get that grounding because you're going to have your support and community there for the foreseeable future. Yeah, it's a huge tension. Eric has a comment. It's difficult to find home when you don't live life alongside the others you come into contact with infrequently. Combinatorial explosive at times. I'll be honest, I don't know what combinatorial explosive means. I know people say it. But yeah, I think you're right about the difficulty. And I think especially in the Netherlands, there is sort of this more isolated participation. America, it seems like culturally we're more friendly and open, especially to foreigners. It probably has a lot to do with our history and the way that we have become this melting pot. But the Dutch are not unfriendly. It's just not as common to have that sort of open house mentality or really the friendliness of foreigners in a real integrated way. They kind of are more in their ruts. And so it's hard to make that transition, especially when at the age that I'm in, because I'm no longer sort of in college or in sort of that transition time where you have that built in to kind of meet new people and all those things. You kind of have to make that yourself. But I think things will change the older my daughter gets. the play dates and the school functions and all of those things. It'll all change. But she's still at such a young age that we're spending most of the time at home. And that's something I think our culture really does miss, the way that it's structured. There's not every mother is at home. So there's not these places where we all gather and do things together and have that community. It's just not built in. And you never know exactly where to find the people that are, if you are at home more permanently. And there's so much downtime that it's hard to just be home all of the time and not have that community base somewhere else. But yeah, anyways, well, we're about 40 minutes. No one's joined yet, but anybody can. I'll probably stay on for another 10 minutes, see how it goes, but otherwise I'll probably just close it down and look forward to next month. I do have some videos that will be coming out on the channel. But I don't know exactly when and how. I was not supposed to be going to the US, but things ended up changing and now I'm going. And so it's exciting, but it's also stressful trying to figure out what I do. So I committed to start before I knew I was doing that. So it hasn't been as consistent as I would like, but there are going to be some videos coming out every so often. And again, I will be back next month for an open conversation. I definitely love having time to chat, and I've loved all the conversations that I've been able to have with people who are watching. So if you would like to come on some other time, that's sort of the time that I have. Mondays, first Monday of every month, 7:30 European time, Amsterdam time. So I'm always available there. And yeah, hopefully I can do them more as time goes on, but we'll just see how it all goes. My life is not my own anymore. I used to have so much free time and had the ability to kind of adjust and make things happen, but I have a tiny little 12-pound human being that determines what I do and where I go. Yeah, and it's it's lovely, but definitely not helpful for productivity and anything but raising a tiny human. Any last questions from anybody in the comments? Thank you so much for conversing with me through text. It's actually very helpful. And hopefully I wasn't just rambling nonsense at all of you. Yeah. I don't know. I don't have much more to say, so I'll stay a couple more minutes in the event that someone sort of last minute wants to come on and join the conversation. And it doesn't have to be about what I've been talking about. It can be about anything. I'm always happy to just chat and let things go where they go. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Eric. The world keeps on spinning. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely interesting about traveling, where you recognize that your life is always sort of you're living a life and it's going on, and you know that things are moving, but you really kind of hits you when you go back and you see the things that have all changed, and you recognize the way that you've changed. And then you have another comment here. Exponential complexity of interpersonal and cultural realities. Yeah. Man, I don't know if I exactly understand what you're meaning by all of that, but I do think there is something to this relation to the way that we interact with each other and the way that the culture affects those things and the way that we've been shaped by the things that have come before, like in our life before us, that we don't even understand the way that it's changing how we're interacting with each other. Um, gosh, there's a lot of ways that could go, and a lot of ways you could mean a lot of things you could mean by that comment. So I don't want to go on a rabbit trail. It's something you don't mean, but I definitely feel um, how deep that well is of the way that culture changes the way that we relate with each other. In all of these ways we don't even fully recognize. And I think for me too, there's something about the way that the internet culture changes and shapes us too. And not only just sort of the culture that gets shared between people who are participating in those realities, but the tension that comes from the technology involved in facilitating the participation of people. So there's all of these algorithms and the way that programs are designed that are changing and shaping our minds. And yeah, it's interesting. Oh, Lynn has another comment. Give baby a kiss. Remind me of my son when he was a baby. It's amazing when you look back at your life, what you regret, spending more time with my son, certainly, and having more kids. Yeah, well, that's where I think I get the most tension, because there are certain things from my life that I'm still trying to close down and kind of move on to figure out what I do next. But I don't want to let sort of that middle ground transition stop me from spending time with my kid and really savoring the quiet, soft moments. And I am a very busy person in my nature. So I like to run around. I like to throw myself into things, but I have to kind of remind myself that at this point in my life, it's probably the worst thing I can do to kind of slow down and take all of these little precious moments that go so fast. So there's a certain gratefulness of being in a different culture as I'm making that transition, because it forces me to slow down in a way that I think I would have taken for granted if I still had a baby when I was in my culture that I was more accustomed to. But I definitely will give her some love for you, Lynn. Thank you. Well, I think at this point I'm going to close it down. Thank you so much for listening to me babble. I appreciate it. And again, I will be back next month with more conversations. If there's a certain conversation topic that is of interest to you that you'd like to kind of use as a jumping point for a future live stream, please let me know. I would love that. I always kind of try to talk about things that are on my mind, but I also would be interested in knowing what's on your mind, and invite anyone who would like to in a conversation with that. So thanks again, guys, and I hope to see you all soon. Bye-bye.